All right, test, is mic working? All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Liberation Forum. My name is Chase, and I will be chairing tonight's forum, brought to you by the Answer Coalition. To protect everyone's safety and health this time, we please ask that you keep masks on while in this space. Answer stands for Act Now to Stop War and End Racism. We are a national organization founded in 2001 dedicated to the fight against racism and imperialism internationally and here in the U.S. Liberation Forum is a community discussion dedicated to connecting the local experiences and struggles of poor and oppressed people to the global system of imperialism and capitalism. We do this because we understand that our people can only win if they have a clear understanding of oppression and how the system impacts those around us and also people around the globe. We will hear from two powerful presentations tonight, and we will have an opportunity to engage with the speakers after they present. First, we'll hear from Aaron, who is a member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation, or the PSL. He will be speaking on the current crisis in the Horn of Africa, as well as an overview of the recent work the party has been doing throughout New York City. Next, we'll hear from a panel of movement leaders on the anniversary of Attica and the organizing against mass incarceration. Our panelists will include Kirby of the Answer Coalition, Eugene Pryor of the Party for Socialism and Liberation, as well as a local community leader and activist, Donna. Thank you so much for our speakers for taking the time to prepare and be here tonight, and for all of you attendees for choosing to spend part of your Friday night here with us. And a special thanks to the People's Forum for allowing us to hold our event at this beautiful space. Tonight, on the heels of Black August and on the anniversary of the Attica prison uprising of September 9th, 1971, our forum is focused on what it means to fight in the Black liberation struggle. Black August is honored every year to commemorate the fallen freedom fighters of the Black liberation movement, as well as to call for the release of political prisoners in the U.S., to condemn the oppressive conditions of the U.S. prisons, and to also emphasize the continued importance of the Black liberation struggle. The uprising at Attica prison was a critical moment that helped spark the tradition of Black August. It was a class-conscious effort to draw national attention to one of the most exploited sectors of society, the millions of working-class people who were forced to endure the abuses of incarceration. The prisoners went on strike to protest their mistreatment and human rights violations, and after their protests were ignored for months on end, they took several prison guards hostage to ensure that they would be heard. Their righteous revolt demanded negotiations, but instead was met with a massacre by the National Guard, state police, and corrections officers, killing 39 people. This is part of a century-long history of revolutionary movements of Africa and its diaspora, from the first enslaved Africans brought here to British North America in 1619, to one of the most well-known rebellions of enslaved people in U.S. history, led by Nat Turner in 1831, all the way to the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom and the Watts Rebellion of the 20th century. Where there is oppression, there is also resistance. And with that, I'll turn it over to our first speaker, an organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation and son of Eritrean immigrants. He has worked with the Justice for Matthew Phillips campaign to fight for accountability for the police officers who murdered New Yorker Matthew in 2020. It is my pleasure to introduce Aaron Gabrehewet to the mic.
Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for coming out for the presentation, and I'll be talking today about the Black August action. Oh, I'm sorry. About the various actions done by the Party for Socialism and Liberation concerning Black August. Okay. So here is a general list of events. I don't know if... okay. Here's just a general list of events that have been done by the PSL here in New York, in New Jersey, as well as in Long Island. We had a Black August Speak Out at Dyckman and Street and Post Ave. Collective Liberation Series at the Justice Center in El Barrio, Black August Study Group in held virtually, Asada Shakur Study Groups, the People's Church Curb Fest, Black August Liberation Mic, the Black August Celebration, and Black August Serve the People. And here are some photos from an event for the street naming for John for the street naming and speak out for John Collado. And so, here's some photos from our collective liberation series at the Justice Center. And our People's Church Curb Fest. On August 20th, the Party for Socialism and Liberation tabled at the Curb Fest at the People's Church in Harlem to free all political prisoners. We gave out children's booklets and brought awareness to the recent John Collado street naming campaign. Whether it's Leonard Peltier, Mumia Abu-Jamal, or Rochelle McGee, we will struggle and unite to make them all free. That same weekend, we hosted a Black August open mic at the Justice Center in El Barrio. We centered performances which draw inspiration from the struggle against racism and mass incarceration. It was a joyful event full of poetry, music, dance, comedy, and theater with fellow organizers and revolutionaries. Thank you to all the artists who came out to share their art with the community. On August 27th, the PSL came together with the community for a day of celebration and commemoration of the struggle at our Black August celebration at Queensbridge Park. We had a barbecue, live music from local performers, and passed out free school supplies and books with the help of Lena's Library. We also talked about the history of Black August, the fight for Black liberation, and how that struggle is connected to the fight for public housing. We also learned about the conditions of public housing and the fight for a just, livable housing system in the city. This is the outreach work that was done in Queens, flyering, postering, and connecting with the community to promote Black August at the Queensbridge celebration. To kick off Black August, the PSL in Brooklyn hosted a study group on Assata Shakur's autobiography. We gathered in Fulton Park to discuss Assata's political upbringing, her journey to understanding the relationship between capitalism and racism, and the United States' brutal repression of her. Attendees spoke of their own journeys in community organizing and the important role it plays in their lives. We closed out the study group with the powerful chant of Assata's words. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love each other and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. The second part of the series was focused on the revolutionary suicide by Huey P. Newton, co-founder of the Black Panther Party, political prisoner, and revolutionary militant. The entire series was a great success. This is some photos of the PSL in Brooklyn doing outreach to promote political education events for Black August. And the PSL in Long Island also hosted a political education event. And at that event, comrades learned about the life and work of George Jackson, including reading excerpts from his widely celebrated book, Blood in My Eye. The PSL in New Jersey attended street outreach in East Orange for Black August and did political education events. In Bloomfield, New Jersey, the PSL held a study group honoring the struggles of Black revolutionaries in the U.S. who have fought for a better future. Special focus was given to the historic release of Sundiata Acoli, who has been granted parole after 49 years as a political prisoner in the U.S. prison system. In commemoration of Black August, the PSL in Queens handed out school supplies, provided health screenings and housing and legal services, and held a study group at Rufus King Park in Jamaica. The following slides are a part of the Black August calendar created by the PSL, highlighting Black leaders from all over the country. These organizers represent a wide variety of movements and struggles, and each one shared why Black August is so important and why they organize. Okay, so transitioning from talking about Black August and how we celebrate that here, it's also important to remember that there are also struggles going on in the heart of Africa right now, especially in the Horn of Africa. And my second speech will be focused around the conflicts going on specifically between Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Somalia. Over the past 2 years, the Horn of Africa has been at the center of a global media coverage of the African continent. However, unlike the hopeful signs shown in 2018 to 2019, it is instead due to a new wave of civil unrest and violent clashes between different groups across the Horn. As a result of these conflicts, it has become more and more difficult for some of the nations of the Horn, principally Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Somalia, to find common ground, build a lasting peace, and enjoy common prosperity. 4 major events have helped set the stage for both the peace and strife that the Horn has endured in the past and today. First, the Ethiopian invasion of Somalia in 2006. Second, the Eritrean-Ethiopian border conflict and subsequent rivalry. Third, the election of Abiy Ahmed as the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. And lastly, and most featured in the news today, the Tigray crisis or Tigray war. However, there are some key factors that have played major roles in the creation of these events, particularly nationalism and outside interference being the causes of the destabilizing effects, while cooperation and non-interference have been a big part of the stabilizing effects. While many associate the highly destructive invasion of Somalia in 2006 as an Ethiopian military operation, it is very important that we remember that the United States military was deeply involved in the invasion. It is important to remember that the reason for this destabilizing invasion is that forces outside of U.S. control came close to unifying the entire country, which would have dramatically shifted the status quo within Somalia. As a result of this, the United States began a surge in military operations in the country, which was combined with an Ethiopian invasion championed by Meles Zenawi. Meles Zenawi was the Prime Minister of Ethiopia at the time and a representative of a coalition party, the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democracy Party, or the EPRDF. And he had met with U.S. General John Abizaid, and three weeks later, Ethiopian and U.S. forces had entered Somalia, working in close coordination with each other to the point of having U.S. Special Forces accompanying Ethiopian troops into Somalia. This would plunge Somalia into another 16 years of civil war that Somalia has yet to escape. Parallel to the conflict in Somalia is the regional conflict between Eritrea and Ethiopia, stemming from the Eritrean War of Independence. Eritrea, a former Italian colony, became a key question in the early decolonization era, right on the heels of World War II. The main debate was whether or not to give Eritrea its independence, which was favored by the many Muslim and minority groups in Eritrea, to create a federal system with Ethiopia, favored by Orthodox Christians there, or to partition the country on the basis of religious lines similar to India and Pakistan, which was favored by the British, as well as being incredibly unpopular with the Eritrean people themselves. With the concept of a partition being soundly rejected by Christians, Muslims, and other minorities in Eritrea, the decision was made to make it an autonomous federated region of Ethiopia. However, immediately after this agreement was ratified, it quickly broke down due to nationalistic sentiments, and as a consequence of this, a strong independence movement emerged that would engage in a brutal war of independence for 30 years. This would be the key context that would shape the Eritrean-Ethiopian conflict, especially after the collapse of the Derg government, the communist government of Ethiopia, which faced sharp opposition from the United States, and the rise of the TPLF in that vacuum afterwards. The TPLF would go on to help create the EPRDF coalition, which would become the dominant political entity in a coalition that would govern Ethiopia from the early 1990s to 2019. Subsequent Eritrean independence, which was of which a referendum concluded that 99.8% of Eritreans had voted for independence, would be ratified by the United Nations and presented a key watershed moment. How would relations between these two neighbors begin after 30 years of war? Ultimately, war would continue as Eritrea and Ethiopia would be unable to agree on a border between them and plunge the two nations into a 2-year border war from 1998 to 2000, which would ultimately conclude with the Algiers Agreement. The main point of the Algiers Agreement was to establish an independent commission that would establish a ruling on the border and that both sides would accept. The Demarcation Commission was unable to complete its work, having received resistance from the Ethiopian government, specifically that the Ethiopian government had felt that the commission was biased against Ethiopia. Due to a deadlock, the council had been unable to proceed and demarcate the border and ultimately had to make a decision based on the information it had in 2007. With zero progress on the border dispute, the Eritrean-Ethiopian border remained closed, trade had halted, and skirmishes across the border were commonplace. A diplomatic solution for peace between Isaias Afwerki, the president of Eritrea, and Meles Zenawi, the prime minister of Ethiopia, seemed all but unreachable, and it would continue as a frozen war for the next 20 years. However, real signs of change in the Horn were beginning to appear as Abiy Ahmed was elected as the third chairperson of the EPRDF in 2018 and immediately began to shift radically from established Ethiopian foreign policy. In an unprecedented move, he had accepted the Commission's ruling on the border at a summit the same year and normalized relations with Eritrea. This new peace was welcomed by all sides and culminated in the historic reopening of telecommunications lines as Ethiopians and Eritreans began calling long-lost families that had been separated after decades of fighting. Yet this reprieve would not last for long. For just 2 years later, in 2020, the TPLF, now sidelined from the government by Prime Minister Ahmed's Prosperity Party coalition, found itself in a new, more centralized Ethiopia. The tension between the New Prosperity Party and the TPLF came to a head over the elections within the Tigray province in 2020, as the Ethiopian federal government had declared the election illegal due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and then fighting would begin and soon engulf the neighboring regions of Amhara, Oromia, and Afar, as well as the neighboring Eritrea, who sent troops into the region of Tigray. While there was hope of a ceasefire and a peacefully mediated solution, renewed fighting in this past August means that for the foreseeable future, the fighting will continue unless there is a dramatic change. But how do we cause this change? How do we become the force for peace as people here in the United States? The way we do this is by using every tool in our arsenal for peace. For this conflict is not just a military conflict, but an ideological one. A conflict between a hyper-nationalist past and pitted against a more cooperative future. We must aggressively oppose any attempt by the United States or any other nation to interfere in the issues that the people who live in Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia are trying to solve themselves. We must be clear that we reject the sanctions imposed on Ethiopia, for we know all this will do will be to harm the working class people of Ethiopia. Most importantly of all, we must not fall into the same old patterns of hyper-nationalism that led Amharas to fight Somalis, Tigrayans to fight Eritreans, and Oromos to fight the discrimination and pain they had suffered throughout the many generations. Instead, we must embrace each other as neighbors and as part of a regional community, a community in which there is respect for each other as human beings, respect for our unique cultures, and respect for our unique perspectives. For I believe that it is possible to reach this future because we have seen the impossible happen. We have seen a potential end to the conflict in Somalia. We have seen almost 60 years of conflict between Eritrea and Ethiopia come to a close. And we will see a stable, peaceful Horn of Africa.
All right. Thank you for that inspirational talk, Aaron. All right. Now we're going to move into the discussion section. So if anyone has a question for Aaron, feel free to raise your hand, and I'll bring the mic over to you. Yes.
Thank you. Can y'all hear me? Okay, so here in the United States, how do we get involved in fighting against imperialism, which we know we're here like in the belly of the beast? What can we do from where we're at?
Right, that's a really good question and a very pertinent one. I would say the most important action you can do is to join an organization that is actively campaigning against imperialism and war throughout the country. Individual action is very good, and I don't want to discourage that, but it's often magnified and multiplied when coupled with an organization or movement that is struggling in the same way. Especially the Answer Coalition, which has been historically fighting against war and racism across the country, from protesting against, the Iraq War, the wars in Afghanistan, as well as reaching out to your local communities. There may be a prominent Ethiopian or Eritrean community wherever y'all may live, and so they might have family or loved ones who may need help, and reaching out to them would definitely go a long way. But the most critical thing is to join an organization and to actively work as a cohesive unit towards changing this reality.
There's supposed to be an independent commission deciding the border between Eritrea and Ethiopia. How is that progressing?
So the independent commission had ultimately stopped in 2007 due to the border conflict and the difficulties there. However, as part of the peace deal between Ethiopia and Eritrea in 2018, the Ethiopian government decided to ratify the decision made by the commission, which was on a deadline by 2007 to come up with a ruling. And as a result, the border conflict has ended between the two countries. Now that the current Tigray crisis puts that into, a bit of flux, so to speak, because the region of Tigray is right on the border between Eritrea and Ethiopia. So, but the good news is that, both parties have agreed to ratify it in 2018.
You referred to the British American stoking these divisions, and is the U.S. backing a certain side, or talk about that?
Yeah, the current U.S. foreign policy, the U.S. portrays itself as an arbitrator, a mediating force. But in reality, especially with the media coverage towards the TPLF, towards the government of Ethiopia, has been much more one-sided in a sense, and it has been because of that. It's caused problems in the sense that the United States is pushing for more an outside mediated solution, whereas the Ethiopian government and its neighbors want the African Union to mediate the solution. So it's been a historic problem where the United States will oftentimes pick sides in the regional conflicts and try to promote their side, not through official policy or something of that matter, but through more subtle ways like the sanctions, like the media coverage. But the best way to resist that is to actively try to work against it. The hashtag No More campaign has done a lot of work in that sense, highlighting the disparities. And, like I said, organizations will always be organizing behind changing this reality, setting up demonstrations, setting up actions to agitate, to show this reality. Does anybody else have any other questions?
All right, Aaron, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. And if anyone has any other questions or thoughts that come to mind, don't worry, we'll have another discussion after our next presentation. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our expert panel of speakers. So first, give a big welcome to Kirby Joseph, who is a first-generation Haitian woman from Brooklyn and organizer with the Answer Coalition. She's been organizing in New York since age 19 against police brutality, mass incarceration, housing insecurity, and LGBTQ plus oppression. She has led actions in solidarity with police brutality victims all over the country, including the successful street naming and Justice for Akai Gurley family campaign waged against the NYPD officer who murdered Akai in East New York in 2013. Kirby continues to help police brutality families honor their loved ones with co-named streets all over New York. She currently works as the Audre Lorde Project as the Safe Outside the Systems project coordinator. All right. So let's give a big welcome to Kirby. So next, I want to give a warm welcome to Donna Hayward Carter, a longtime organizer against police brutality, alongside her late husband, Nicholas Hayward, Sr. Answer Coalition and PSL members recently helped Donna with a major victory of getting a street named after her late husband in Gowanus. Donna's son has been incarcerated since the age of 18 and faces life in prison. So let's give a warm welcome to Donna. And last but not least, let's welcome Eugene Pryor, host at Breakthrough News, author of Shackled and Chained, Mass Incarceration in Capitalist America, and a member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Yes, let's give a warm welcome for Kay Williams, a local artist, historian, and community organizer. Kay is a founding member of the Black Lives Matter Global Network and Movement NetLab. How do you pronounce his name?
Key.
Oh, Key, I'm sorry. So I have some questions for you all. First question is for Eugene. So today, September 9th, marks the 51st anniversary of the Attica prison uprising. This was a 5-day rebellion in 1971, led by Attica inmates in protest of unlivable and inhumane conditions, as well as denial of human rights. Can you speak to the outcome and significance of this organization from inside prison walls, as well as the connection to the present-day movement for rights of incarcerated people?
All right, well, can you hear me? Is that all right? All right. Didn't expect to speak first, but I think it's an important question. I think obviously we know that what the results of the Attica uprising is that they were brutally massacred for standing up for themselves and for the human rights of incarcerated people. I think the overall significance at the time was obviously on multiple different levels. I mean, for some people in the country, obviously it reflected a opening of the door to the knowledge of what the real conditions were like inside of prisons. I think for other people in the country, it was a representation of sort of the tide of resistance that was sweeping the country and sweeping the globe. I mean, obviously the Attica, the prisoners who were rebelling in Attica were highly politically conscious. They were putting out a political program. They were discussing the relationship of their problems to the broader problems of the working class and oppressed people around the world. So, it was very much in tune with the tenor and the times of what was going on there in the United States and certainly anywhere else. And ultimately, that's why it was drowned in blood, because it wasn't just a quote-unquote prison uprising or riot or whatever it may have been, but it was really a front of struggle in a worldwide uprising against capitalism and imperialism that was happening. And to allow them to win all they were demanding was their most basic human rights. I mean, they were just demanding things like toilet paper, the right to be able to be educated, the right to have, some basic human interaction. So it wasn't like they were asking for the world. They were just asking to be treated like human beings. But it was beyond just their own individual demands. But to grant their demands was to ultimately grant the idea that human beings standing up and fighting for what they believe in was in and of itself just. And that was obviously a very dangerous idea, because we were not in a period where people were just talking about little mild reforms, but big reforms and real revolution in many different ways. And it was happening in many different places around the world. A rising tide of resistance in Africa perhaps is a very relevant parallel to this moment. So obviously, I think that it was at that time a very dangerous development for the ruling class. And I think in many ways a very exciting development for those who were struggling, because it meant that everywhere, in the streets, in the prisons, in the military, everywhere you went in American society, people were rebelling and standing up. And I think that, when we talk about our current moment, what's the significance to our current moment? I mean, there's always a general significance to all history of struggle, right? To everyone who's struggling and continuing to fight today, especially when you're struggling under very difficult conditions in the context of, what's happening. Obviously, looking at people who were struggling, in really some of the most difficult conditions and what they had to face and go up against, I think speaks very heavily to, the types of things that can continue to inspire us as we move on today. But maybe more specifically, I think it speaks to the fact that I think since 2008, we've seen a rising tide of people behind bars rising up as well. I mean, the Georgia prison strike in 2008, it feels like a long time ago now, but it really kicked off a whole range of actions and activities. And there's been national prison strikes for the last 3, I think maybe 4 years that have been organized by Jailhouse Lawyers Speak. And you have the development of new networks, new organizations, new people who are rising up against the system of mass incarceration, but also trying to tie, their conditions to the conditions of those outside, to link their struggle to the conditions of those who are outside, to develop a broader struggle, against the repressive forces, mass incarceration, and capitalism. So I think that there's a lot of sort of individual parallels, but I think it's just important to remember, maybe over and above anything else, that the fight still continues, that obviously many things have changed between now and then, but that sort of the parallels and the upsurge of people fighting for their own liberation in both instances, have been able to lift up people behind bars who are willing to risk it all to continue to fight. So maybe that's a little bit of that answer. That's maybe a long question about what the significance of Attica is, but I think it's something we should try to remember every single year. As they said at the time, Attica, all or nothing. I mean, that's what they were really fighting for, and I think we can learn a lot from that slogan.
Thank you, Eugene, for that response. All right, Key, the next question is for you. So, as a longtime organizer in New York City against mass incarceration for most marginalized, especially for Black and transgender nonconforming folks, can you touch base on what the struggle against mass incarceration, particularly for POC queer folks, has looked like, and what is still needed?
Yeah. Brilliant answer. I think that, especially considering what's happening below us in this space and what's happening in the space that we're having, these conversations obviously go hand in hand, talking about the legacy of mass incarceration, and also reading the words that are on the wall alongside us from Kirby, right, speaking about the legacy of resistance. I think that T, G, and C folks are transgender, gender nonconforming individuals. The current fight, so my background as a queer, transmasculine individual has really come from an abolitionist framework, right? As a organizer, as a movement builder, and in the history of our work and what we've been doing, I think at the end of the day, it still comes down to that conversation. When we think about abolition, the easiest way for me is to talk about safety. So everything that you say in regards to the resistance and the uprisings that we saw in Attica, the reality of folks' humanity and that needing to be like reckoned with. One of I think the current ideal of what's happening specifically in New York State, in New York City, is frustrating to me because it's a conversation about where do we house transgender, gender nonconforming people, where do we put people according to their gender identity. As an abolitionist, I'm arguing that nobody belongs in prisons, nobody belongs in jails, period. And when you look at a community such as TGNC individuals, folks who are already coming from a poverty, hyper encountering violence, and often family rejection first, and so what are we looking at folks being the crime that folks are committing, right, that are putting them into these circumstances in the first place of facing incarceration. Is it a crime to be homeless? Is it a crime for your family to reject you at the ages of 13, 14, 16, where you have to then be homeless? Those are the types of things that TGNC folks are facing. And I think that when we think of some of the most popular cases, Ashley Diamond just was recently released in the past month, and what she understood in her incarceration before, but even more during, she said that being incarcerated as a Black trans woman doubled her down on being an abolitionist, because it showed her that there was no other way to navigate this system, to navigate this world, other than to really decarcerate and decrease the mass incarceration system. And that's what this conversation is about. I think abolitionists, we sometimes have the target of we're thinking too big, right? But I think that when I think about incarceration, I really am thinking about that the preface word, which is mass, right? Mass. That we're talking about visualizing a world that is different than the world that we already live in. We already live in a world where murderers and rapists and violent offenders, etc., live among us every single day. So what abolitionists are arguing for, right, is the alternative to that. And so I think about TGNC New Yorkers, but TGNC folks who are incarcerated across this country. I think at the end of the day, it speaks to the humanity of what do people deserve before they're incarcerated? What do people deserve while they're incarcerated? But what is the world that we're delivering people back into once they are released back into community? I think all of those things go in hand. But I will always start with the answer, the latter part of the question, which is what is needed. What do transgender, gender nonconforming folks need? Resources at the end of the day, which are the same resources that everybody's advocating for. Let's make it real clear. Trans and gender nonconforming people are not asking for anything that nobody else is asking for. We're all asking to be housed. We're all asking for health care. We're all asking for access to employment. We're all asking for clean water. It's the basic bare minimums, of human rights. Trans folks are asking for the same exact things that everybody else is asking for. And so there really cannot be this kind of narrowing in. But as those who are more marginalized or who embody more marginalizations or multiple marginalizations by being Black and trans, and experiencing these other economic disadvantages that we all experience, I think that there's so much more that we have in common. And in the front of resistance of mass incarceration, the resistance of the police state, the resistance of white supremacy, I think if we honestly start there, but what actually do we have more that's in common? Then what are the differences between us, when it comes down to identity? But we have a lot more in common than what we think about. And I think just yes, it's important to highlight and uplift the voices of transgender, gender nonconforming individuals. But when I look at things like the New York City Task Force that is working right now with New York City to figure out, to answer that question of what do we do with transgender individuals who are incarcerated, one of the demands and the outcomes is we got to have resources before we even get there. And I think that that's just a consistency that continues through and through.
Thank you so much for your response, Key. We appreciate that. All right. Next question is for Donna. So you have led community organizing efforts against police violence in the name of Nicholas Hayward Jr., the son of your late husband, Nicholas Hayward Sr., who was killed by police in Gowanus for playing with a toy gun in 1994. You're also personally familiar with the challenges of supporting a loved one who is incarcerated. In your experience, how are the struggles against police violence in the community and the struggle for the rights of incarcerated people connected?
Repeat that last part, please, again.
In your experience, how are the struggles against police violence in the community and the struggle for the rights of incarcerated people connected?
How are they connected? Well, police brutality in the communities has everyone fearful for their lives because they don't know what to expect if the police is called on them for any given reason. It could be a minor call, and it can turn out to be something big. And as far as people that's incarcerated, I'm going to speak about my son. My son has been incarcerated since 1994. At the age of 18, he got arrested for double murder, and one attempted murder. He was sentenced to 2 life sentences plus 67 years. So if you count back from 94 to 2022, my son been incarcerated most of his life for something that he did not do. And the treatment that they get out on the streets, they also get inside prisons. It's a struggle because, you know, I feel the pain of people who have lost their child to police murder unjustly from being out there with my husband fighting for his son. Now, mind you, my son got arrested April 1994, wrongly convicted. My husband's son got murdered in September 1994, unjustly. So fighting for both of those and now bearing the burden by myself is very hard, very hard. It's something that it weighs heavy on you because even if you have a problem, if I get sick, I'm scared to call the ambulance because the cop's going to show up. So I'm fearful, not only for myself, but for everybody else. I done seen too many incidents where police was called on someone for something minor, and it turned out the person either got shot or killed or, you know, what have you. And speaking with my son, the stuff that he endures inside the prisons is just as bad because at any given time they can beat him, just make up a lie and just beat him and throw him in a hole for weeks on end, you know, for no reason at all. You know, and I've been trying to get him out of there for the last 28 years that he's been in there. And it's very hard. The amount of money that's needed for a lawyer and, you know, it's a burden, you know. And honestly speaking, I really don't even like speaking about him being incarcerated and the murder of my son together because I know it's you know, both of them is separate, but in reality, they are together. They are the same. So, with that being said, there is no difference between community policing and policing inside the jailhouse because they all treat us the same way. You know, they treat us as enemies out on the street just because of our skin color. They treat us as worse than human in jailhouses because of our skin color or our gender, which is not, you know, it's hard for me to go see my son and look at him and see the things that have been done to him since his 28 years of being there. Even speaking to him on the phone is hard because I have to listen to all the stuff that he's been through while he was in there. And it changed him to the point where I don't even know my son anymore because he doesn't talk like my son anymore. You could tell he has a lot of pain, he has a lot of anger, he's frustrated, he's aggravated, and you know, it's like he feel like he's all alone, and I know he's not. You know, I'm there for him, but I can't be there for him like I want to be. And that hurts more than anything. You know, I watched my husband fight for the last 25 years of his life for justice for his son that's been murdered by the police. And he fought to his death. He fought till he couldn't fight no more. He got to the point where he couldn't walk, he couldn't eat, he couldn't talk, he couldn't do anything but just lay in the bed. And it's hard to see your mate going through something like that and dealing with somebody, or your child, that's incarcerated. You know, being out here by myself now without my partner to fight this struggle, it's harder for me. And sometimes I feel like I want to give up but I know I can't give up, because if I give up, what is that telling everybody else? I have to continue to fight not only for my son, but also for my husband and his son. And I'm going to continue to do that until my last breath.
Thank you, Donna, for your incredibly powerful words. Kirby, the next question is for you. So you have led and participated in campaigns for the freedom of political prisoners, such as Jalil Montanquim and Reverend Joy Powell, as well as wrongly incarcerated community members, such as Prakash Churman and Ronald Williams. What does it mean to actively be in solidarity with those folks on the inside, and why is it essential to include their struggles in a larger people's movement?
Before I answer that, I want to uplift something that Donna is mentioning, what all the panelists are mentioning. Something that people have to understand is that when we support folks who are incarcerated, we take on their sentence. And so Donna has been experiencing a sentence for the past 28 years. And I think when we are supporting people who are on the inside, we have to understand that they're in a type of hell that we will never understand. We'll never understand it. The time that they wake up and go to sleep is not their own. When they eat is not their own. If they get to go outside, it's in a stale place and they get air for an hour. If they say anything, if they resist, things that they can read can have them put in a dark room for weeks, for months. Mutulu Shakur spent most of his prison sentence in a dark hole. And he is dying from cancer right now. And they're saying he's not dying fast enough, so they won't release him. Right? So when we are talking about folks who are incarcerated and supporting them, there's a level of compassion that we must have to uplift these cases. That's one. Two, we have to keep our comrades' names relevant. The news is not going to cover it. Fox News is not going to say, we need to free Mutulu. Breakthrough News will do it. Shout out to Breakthrough News. But mainstream media is not going to do it. So our work also as folks who may have social capital, shout out to the Instagrammers, tweeters, Facebookers, whatever it is that folks use to keep these folks' names relevant. Because if we don't do it, nobody else will. Not every political prisoner and incarcerated person is Mumia Abu-Jamal. Mumia Abu-Jamal is the most famous political prisoner in the world. A lot of folks are mostly nameless. People also have to be consistently involved. These are long-term cases. Folks in prison 10 years, 20 years. Donna's son was given 2 life sentences plus 60. So like, does his ghost come back and like serve the other years of sentencing? Like, what happens, right? Like when these judges bang their gavel and they give these ridiculous numbers, right? And I want to bring up the case of Ronald Williams because he's a comrade who was from Gowanus houses, which is in Brooklyn. This is actually the same houses that Donna's stepson was killed in. And Ronald was sentenced to 100 years with a possibility of parole after 20 years. He was in his early 20s. In his early 20s. And because of resistance that we provided on the inside, letter writing, calling the prison, sending him books, constant visitation, they moved him from jail to jail to jail in hopes that it will decrease interaction with him. Slavery was abolished, supposedly, but legal in prison. You are the property of people that want to destroy you, that don't have your care at heart, right? Look at what was going on with Mia Abu-Jamal. He had hepatitis C, critically ill. They would not give him his medication, right? But how many people are like that? Critically ill, not getting their medication. How many times have I heard from incarcerated people, they're not getting their mail from their families? The only lifeline they have on the outside, right? So it's deep. It's not just when it's their birthday, we uplift them. It has to be consistent because they need that from us, actually. They need the consistency because they're counting down days that will never end. Maybe they'll get appeals. Maybe they won't. Maybe the parole board will think they changed. Maybe they won't. Mass incarceration is sustained by poor working class people who want to see their family members. What if you can't put money on the books anymore? What if you can't take the bus, then the train, then the airplane to get to see your incarcerated family member? Donna told me one time that to see her son, she had to fly to Alabama? Virginia, in a racist town, and then take the only bus to go up a mountain to get to the prison. It's like a 16-hour, 20-hour journey. This is a person who's an elder, who lives in New York City. What happens when she can't support anymore? What resentment builds for somebody who's on the inside, who's in darkness, and you're on the outside struggling, you can't support anymore, right? So I would say upliftment, consistency are the main things. And I want to also uplift consistency for the movement of mass incarceration. It cannot just be when we hear about a case. There's always cases, we just don't hear about them. There's always no clean water. There's always no hot water. There's always no heat. How do we garner a movement like the one that we did for George Floyd for folks who are incarcerated every day? How do we do that? What is the energy that we have to provide to do that? Because that's what they need, right? There was a huge movement in New York City, in Sunset Park for the prison that was there. And Key knows about this, and a lot of people know about this because folks went out there every night in the cold. And that was great for 6 months, and then it stopped. Right. It's not because the water came back on, but there are still issues there. So there's a consistency as organizers that we have to keep bringing to this struggle. If we know for a fact, right, that the system doesn't work for you or uplifts our stories, then we have to make sure that we are providing the relevance that incarcerated people need so they can survive on their day-to-day. Because the only way that we can guarantee their safety is by keeping their names alive. Because if they know that there's people on the outside that care, they ease up just a little bit. And that's actually like a fact.
Yeah. Thank you, Kirby, for your incredible response. Yes, so this next question is open to all of the panelists to respond, and it's this. The United States currently incarcerates over 2.3 million people and has an additional 4.5 million people on parole or in probation, the majority of whom are black, brown, and poor working class. The prison industrial complex has become a more well-known term described by prison abolitionist organization Critical Resistance to be the overlapping interests of government and industry that use surveillance, policing, and imprisonment as solutions to economic, social, and political problems. And what is the connection between mass incarceration and capitalism in the United States? And what does the organization to dismantle this system look like?
Excuse me? Are we sure? I can say a thing. I just want to add to that. So the United States has the most incarcerated people in the world. The United States incarcerates more people than India and China, both countries that have 1 billion people each. The United States says it has no political prisoners. Like, what? Political prisoners? We don't have that, right? Even though we know they have political prisoners. it's not just jails, it's prison facilities, it's juvenile facilities, it's ICE captivity, right? It's precincts, it's police in our schools, right? So there's a clear structure that is built to keep people not only repressed, not only isolated, but in cages. And there's always room for cages, according to the system. There's no room for healthcare, there's no room for shelters, there's no room for education, but there's always room for cages and funds for those cages, right? I think something that we have to do as organizers is, one, deconstruct the idea of who the criminals are. Because right now in our community, when we're in danger, what is the lesson that you learn? If you're in trouble, who do you call? What's the number? 911, right? If people are in jail, it's because they're bad people, right? Even though we know that actually in New York City, 74% of people are in pretrial detention. Do folks know what pretrial detention is? That means you don't know what your charges are and you're in a cage. You don't have a court date, nothing, you're just in there. 66% of those people who are in pretrial detention are black, right? Waiting for their court date and waiting to know what their charges are. And instead of letting people go home and be home until they know those things, they will keep you in the cell. They have budget to keep you in the cell, billions of dollars, right? And these are people that don't even know what they're arrested for. But then there's an ideology, a pathology, a disease, mind, right? That these are people that deserve to be there, even though they have no idea why they're there in the first place. Most people who are incarcerated are poor working class people. I'm gonna give you some more numbers. Bail at the minimum is about $10,000. Most people who are incarcerated make $11,000 a year. How are they gonna pay their bill? New York City is a 2/3 renter state. What house are they gonna put down to get them out of cells, out of bail, right? And these are things that people don't know about. Our community don't know the ins and outs of mass incarceration. They don't know where their tax dollars or social security dollars are going towards. They don't know about when their money is defunded from schools and given the police to occupy the schools, what that means. They think it's safety. Even though we know that crime in New York City is at the lowest it's been, they still hire 2,000 more cops. Your tax dollars go towards cop fringe benefits, meaning their retirement and health insurance. $11 billion, most of it went to retirement for police officers. Police officers who have records of harassing people, of doing stop and frisk, and of killing people. And they still get some of the best retirement packages in the country. NYPD has the best union in the country. And they put money aside for when cops kill people. They have money for that. It's in their budget. They budget for death, right? And these are things that community members have to know. I think one of the and I say all this to say that our main work is not only just agitation, but information. We have to let our community know what's going on. And we can prove it. We have not only history, but the data. There are people that literally work on getting as much information as they can about mass incarceration and police brutality and its connection to give to people, because they know that the system won't. They work hard, they're tirelessly working to make sure that we have the data. We have to make sure that we disseminate it. This should be everywhere. This panel, we need to, we can go right now. We need to go to Times Square right now. Let's get the mic, let's get the camera, let's go. And provide this agitation. And provide this information. And we have to be consistent. Consistency. People love talking about the Panthers, but they knew California law. They knew every word. It wasn't just about wearing leather jackets and berets, y'all. They had to study because they had to inform people, right? And their work was informing people about mass incarceration and police brutality. Besides imperialism, communism, all the things, right? But that's those are the main topics that they spoke about, because that's what was impacting the community. And I think that we have to get to a place, and it's not about knowing every quote and every revolutionary and giving me dates. I don't care about none of that stuff. We can teach you that stuff. It's more about having information about what's happening, understanding it, and saying it in a way that's digestible, so then we can tell it to other people. So when people are saying, well, people who are in jail are there because they're bad people, somebody else that's not us can say, actually, they're just sitting there rotting, and our tax dollars are paying for it. Why you pass the mic? You next.
I got nothing behind that. There you go.
Okay, I'll say.
You
I
next,
guess I'll
but
say
you
something.
called me out.
Well, that's turnabout is fair play. No, I appreciate everything, that's been said so far. I mean, I think the question, what's the connection between mass incarceration and capitalism? I think is pretty clear. I mean, mass incarceration, militarized policing, whatever you want to call it, is just an institution for social control of oppressed people in America, because they don't want to do anything to actually resolve the social problems people deal with. I mean, the way I always describe it in a way is it's sort of like holding a lid on a boiling pot. Obviously, when you look at the context of what's happening in the country, there is a direct correlation between the rise of mass incarceration, the number of people in prison, and the complete and total attack and destruction of black communities in the United States of America. And it's not a coincidence that the same neighborhoods that are the most targeted for mass incarceration were the most rebellious neighborhoods in the late 1960s and the late 1970s. I don't even really want to go into the statistics. I don't know if this is a crowd I need to go into the stats with. It has nothing to do with crime. It has nothing to do with public safety. We could be here for the next 3 hours talking about the range of studies that prove that a huge number of police and a huge number of prisons and all these tough sentences didn't do anything at all really to address public safety. So we know it's not about that whatsoever. So obviously there has to be some other reasoning behind it. And I think the obvious reason is when you have decided as a society that you are going to deliberately dispossess huge numbers of people from any real opportunity to make a living, a livelihood, a decent living, whatever it may be, and you force them into the margins, into precarious gray and black market activities, you've criminalized their existence to such a degree. You have to find some way to deal with that social fallout, because capitalism is a system that, really functions essentially on stability to a large degree. I mean, in order to continue to be able to produce things over and over, you can't be in a constant state of revolt. But you've introduced conditions that will induce people to revolt. You've introduced them in the community with 400 years of history of revolt. So you have to find some other solution to make sure that you can hold that lid on that boiling pot. And that's when they started to open up, this huge, huge new frontier of people being funneled into prisons. And this, militarization of police actually came ahead of that. But, basically, and really as a weapon against radical movements in the 1960s and the 1970s. And you can see that, right? They come up with the SWAT team. They start putting billions of dollars into local police. They do it 100% to try to crush the most radical wing of the black liberation movement. Then they come behind that to try to make sure they can control those same communities when they deliberately, for their own reasons, in order to make more money, dispossess those same communities. So it's a direct correlation between the function of mass incarceration and the functioning of capitalism. The two things go hand in hand for the past 40 years. You can't actually have one without the other. The entire construct of sort of the late capital, low wage, neoliberal, whatever you want to call it, system, one element of that is mass incarceration in the United States of America. It's part of the overall package, just like sending jobs overseas, just like exploiting people in Bangladesh for their super low wages, all of that, just like they want to invade Iraq and Afghanistan. It's all part of one system that's all designed in order to create the maximum amount of profit for a tiny group of people right at the top. So I think it's pretty clear, it's pretty straightforward. I think you can kind of see it with your eyes. I mean, I always say to people, well, just look at the places where most people come from who are in jail or prison, and just look around. Look at all the things they don't have, and you just put those two and two together. And I think it's pretty straightforward. But there's so much that's out there to try to obfuscate that. And I think, speaking to what Kirby's saying, the importance of the consistency and continuing to do it. is we're in a battle of ideas in a situation of information warfare. And even though some of these things seem so obvious, there's so much counter information that's put out there to make you doubt yourself, that the things that you kind of know in your gut feel wrong, or like, oh, I don't know, something about that doesn't seem like it is what it is, that they can come up with some sort of reasoning and some sort of, ideological buttressing to keep you in line with the system, which means that a lot of what we have to do is continue to fight on a day-to-day basis this ongoing reinforcement of the most reactionary ideas in our communities. I mean, this whole, I don't even really know what to call it, so-called crime wave that is being talked about all around the country. I mean, Kirby already mentioned it. Crime is still at 40-year lows. And so it's like if I'm at 2 and I go to 3, yes, that's an increase. But if 10 years ago I was at 25, obviously being at 3 is still significantly below 25. But they make you think, oh, you're back at 25, so you got to do all the same stuff you did then, and that didn't work then. But it's all used to create in people's mind a situation where the things that happen to you are amplified beyond where they really are. I mean, I think anyone here who's been a victim of violent crime, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That, like, when you're victimized, you're not worried about the numbers. So if anyone is a victim of anything, or their family member or their loved one or someone they know or someone in their neighborhood, if that personalized experience is then filtered through a lens where you're constantly hearing crime is skyrocketing, it's going to feel like crime might be skyrocketing. And it's like, damn, it hit me. And so then you start to think, well, we got to do something about it. And then you start to think, well, what can we do? And then the obvious, most short-term solution is, Kirby said it, 911, the police, the things that immediately come to mind that Hollywood, that TV shows kind of show you is I think most people think maybe it's not the only thing we can do, but we got to do something, and we got to do it now. So it's to create this false sense of urgency around quote unquote crime in order to enforce this entire agenda that actually doesn't even address public safety, but does control the people who they want to stay poor, stay disproportionately unemployed, and so on and so forth, so they can continue to exploit them. So, it's a really vicious cycle that we're in, and we're up against a lot of different multiplicity of people. There's like the outright right wing, there's the liberal right wing, there's the white racist, there's the so-called black politician. I mean, they all have their own little variation on the same theme, and we're kind of going against all of them at the same time and trying to hit all these different little nuances. So that consistency and that ongoing fighting and battling and education is going to be key, but it's an uphill climb, I think, in a lot of ways, and I think we shouldn't close our eyes to that.
All right. Thank you so much to all the panelists for your time and for sharing your experiences with us. So now we're going to move into discussion. So if anyone has a question for Donna, Kirby, Key, or Eugene, please raise your hand, and we have some time for this discussion.
We have to stay up here?
Yes. You can never leave.
So this question could be for any of the panelists who feel inclined to answer it. But just for some context, I just moved here from another state, from Rhode Island. And I was doing a lot of prison-related organizing there. And currently, prisoners in Rhode Island incarcerated folks in Rhode Island, are going through a hunger strike because there's not a lot of, they're going through a giant heat wave, there's no fans. They're upset with the disciplinary system, there's toxic mold where they're living. They're demanding better programming. They're experiencing a lot of medical malpractice and a lot of CO abuse inside. So there's this kind of trend that I've noticed. Rhode Island is currently trying to reckon with the fact that the conditions within that building, at least the physical building itself, it's so old that it almost can't accommodate better conditions, or at least that's the argument that RIDOC, the Rhode Island Department of Corrections, is giving us. So I'm kind of noticing this trend throughout the country. I listened to another podcast recently about Alabama, and they just passed something to basically form and build a new prison complex there because for the same reasons, their infrastructure is just getting really, really old. So I'm kind of wondering just like, how do we reconcile the need to meet basic conditions and human rights inside at present for the people who are currently there without this move towards building new prisons or reinvesting more money in prisons? And obviously there are preventative resources that can kind of be instigated on the outside to prevent more people going in, but I'm wondering what can be done for the people who are currently there who are suffering these conditions. And as an abolitionist, how do you reconcile that?
You had your hand up, no?
Should I take a couple questions?
Yeah, we'll stack them.
10 people got their hand up.
They all for you, Miss Donna.
Yeah,
all the
that's right.
questions is for you.
Not so.
I just wanted to echo what the previous person who asked the question said. I live in New Jersey, and we dealing with the same issues in the same Department of Corrections. There was a massive heat wave through New Jersey, and there was no air conditioning. And a big point of struggle was trying to convince people, like, because sometimes you fight, like Eugene and Kirby said, you fight against these people who think, oh, that's just bad people. And you convince them these are human beings who need to be treated with just human decency. And but to go back to my question, I know Eugene, you had talked about the Attica prison uprising, and so I know that was also part of the Black August, in response to George Jackson. Is there a way for us on the outside to help facilitate those sort of movements that happen and develop within the carceral system and help it spread to other prisons throughout the country?
Paul. Kirby, stop facilitating. Oh, sorry.
He had his hand up.
Got one right here. Yeah.
Thank you. Good eye, good eye.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a brief comment about Attica. In 1971, a Puerto Rican comrade at the time who was doing solidarity work was invited to Attica as an observer, Tom Soto. And he went there and came back and testified to the horrendous crimes committed against the prisoners. But one thing that was noteworthy was he commented on the very, very powerful solidarity between black and white prisoners in Attica. Now, it was about 54% African American, 37% white, and 9% Puerto Rican at the time. So that's a clue as to the rebellion. But he was very strong that he said he had never seen such solidarity and was very far advanced from what he had seen outside the prison, in the community in general, I mean. But it's just interesting the contrast between the incredible racism of the press, the governor, the police, the state troopers, and the real flowering of solidarity inside the prison. And that's something I think that we want to look forward to in the future. I don't know if that's happened other places, but it really struck me from Tom Soto's point of view. Thank you.
There's two left. And then we round it up.
Word, peace. Thank y'all for this wonderful panel. I had a question, two questions. One for Donna. Hold on. I know.
Direct.
I mean, obviously, like, I don't know your son or your husband, and the system that we live under constantly dehumanizes black people, right? Oh, black people, they're impervious. They can take pain. Black mothers who are in the hospital, they're just not really accounting for the pain that they're going through. And, I think a big part of the fight that we're involved in is to humanize our people. So I wanted to hear, if you could talk about your son and husband. What are they like as human beings? What would the media not cover, right, about who they are as human beings? And the second question I have is around the Attica Rebellion. So everybody, 2 years ago, people were burning down police stations in Minneapolis. The Minneapolis City Council said, oh, we're going to abolish the police, trust us. And, you saw places like in Texas where kids were protesting for black lives and their grandparents were like Klan members, right? But, to Paul's point of this multiracial, multinational solidarity that we're told, oh, it's impossible. White people hate black people hate white people, and Asian people hate black people. I mean, everybody hates, whatever, right? But the Attica Rebellion shows something different. But also the 2020 rebellions also show something different. So how do we get here? From burning down police stations 2 years ago to now, there's more police in the street and racists, are storming the Capitol. So I guess how do we get here? And what is that past, from Attica from George Jackson to George Floyd? How does that, what does that teach us about this moment? But yeah, I definitely want to hear about, humanizing your family, Donna.
Thank you for giving your comments. I had a question. My name is Paul as well. I'm a doctoral student and an adjunct professor at John Jay. One of you had talked about counter narratives and how there's always like a counter narrative that combats really the vision for freedom. I found when I've been teaching like criminal justice classes that, even though the class is like mostly black and brown, they still want to join. They still want to become cops. They still want to become, part of the system. And I guess I've been like throwing anything at the board that works in terms of like trying to convince them not to go that route, like showing them the brutality, showing them that the brutality is aimed at their own people, at our own people. But I guess I was wondering, like, is there anything you would say for like how to combat the narratives, especially for really young undergrad students who, I know growing up in New York, that's the only thing they hear, that, join the NYPD, change it from inside, you'll be the difference, something like that. And it's really hard to, especially over 16 weeks, to be like, everything you heard is a lie, and actually like change your whole mindset, like the thing that you've been dreaming about becoming is actually a terrible thing to become. I guess I just had a question about how to counter that, so thank you.
Can you take one more?
Yeah. Yeah. Y'all remember the questions?
Yeah.
All right.
I think we're collectivize it.
Thank you, comrades. This has been great. So I am a labor organizer, so I'm often thinking about things from that perspective, and I often think about incarcerated workers as workers. Just like the slave rebellions or disruption of capital production, like prison uprisings and rebellions are similarly a sort of disruption of this like profit machine, right? And so I think that it's really important to try to bring recognized unions on the outside together in solidarity with incarcerated workers who, of course, are forbidden from forming recognized unions. Like that's against the Constitution. So how do you think, especially like radical and progressive unions or union locals who want to get involved in this struggle, like how can they connect up with it? How can they support? Thank you.
Great, thank you.
I'll go backwards. I think when it comes to unionizations, one of the first things that I've come to realize, and I think the biggest thing that unions need to do in order to stand in solidarity with oppressed communities and oppressed peoples, is to dismantle and abolish the police unions that exist across this country, to have a firm stance that police do not deserve to be unions because they're not free, they're not labor workers, they're not organized towards any type of progress for the people. And so I think when we're talking about unions, and I think that if there can be a solidarity politic or a stance across the board that all unions must kind of pledge to, is to say we're actually going to actively work to say that this is the difference between us and them. All right? I think that there's just so much, people allow police unions to have so much power, as Kirby said. Just on the tip of unions, all of the work that organizers do, the police unions are so much more organized. Our mayor, who is a former cop himself, was endorsed by the police unions, right? And for a lot of black folks, like, there was not an understanding of what that actually meant in reality. There's been a lot of conversations around the fact that, the mayor, for example, really spoke to the elder black and brown communities of New York because of this ideal of safety. that was reinforced. So just in terms of unionization, I think that, like, for me, that's the first stance, is to really just have a clear line that police unions, CEO unions, they're not the same as worker unions. And if that was an act of solidarity that could happen as a principle, I think that would help a lot of disruption for the power that the unions hold. And I think in terms of John Jay, which, if you're local to New York, everybody in New York knows, especially on the organizing front, that that's where cops go to get trained. We actually call it cop college. Like, that's what John Jay is known for. For me, as an organizer and someone who believes in the spectrum of allies, I understand that on one side you have your allies, on the other side you have your opposition, and they are just as organized as we are. And we've seen that on the right for many, many years and many, many decades, that they are so unified and they're so organized, right, that they are able to have an institution that has as much relevance, that has someone like you who's like, I got 16 weeks, how do I disrupt this mindset of these individuals, where the entire institution is committed to building the next police force. And I would, for me personally, to you, is that the work that you want to do, right? Do you want to sit at a school that has the brand reputation for decades of being the place that's going to train cops to be cops? That's just something that I will want you to really sit and reckon with for your own wellness, for your own being, so that you're not spending your Friday night at 8:00 at night like, damn, how do I get these kids and not want to be cops anymore? But understanding that they have as many institutions as we have, and that they have been really well organized in the case. In regards to the humanity, I can only speak of my experiences with Mr. Hayward. And I'm going to tear up a little bit, but tall, gentle giant, from my experience of being in downtown Brooklyn, who came out to every single protest that he could possibly come out to the cookouts, to the barbecues, to the basketball tournaments, every single day, every single summer. At the end of the day, I think about a father figure, somebody who brought children into this world, and even though he lost his child young, to the day that he died, remained a father without a child. That's for me when I think about Mr. Hayward, and I think about his legacy and what he put in, and how even though he's no longer here and Nicholas has no longer been here for some time, we still remember their names because of his work. And I think that, it's talking about the humanity of a man like Nicholas Hayward Sr. was indeed that guy, and he was cool. He was so cool. Such a cool, don't let him hear it. Yeah, you're like, please. But for me, that was my relationship with him. That I, kind of just came into off of what Kirby was, Kirby's work talks about Akai Gurley, which their stories are so similar. I know that's how I was woven into the Hayward family story and the Akai Gurley family story, in the sense of the same exact situation. For me, I'll just touch on that point. I'm literally going backwards in my brain across the room. And I think about Attica, and I think about the films that I've seen about it, and at the end of the day, as an organizer, and some of the things that I've had to do to take care of myself, is to realize that, what happened in Attica, a lot of motherfuckers aren't going to be down for. What happened to the incarcerated people of Attica, of being told, as you hear the echoes in the documentary, right, put your hands up, we will not harm you, and then they're shot and murdered. A complete affront to justice. And so I for me, that's why it comes back to these first couple of questions around, as an abolitionist, and even Ruthie Wilson Gilmore and Robert G. Kelly, they were at the socialism conference this past weekend. They all came down to the fact that abolitionists have been having the same exact question asked to them for the past decades, which is, how do we stop the expansion of jails while at the same time take care of people who are currently incarcerated? And they have come to, for decades, the same answer, which is that we have to just abolish jails. There is no reform. There is no better condition. There is no, we can design this jail to be better than the last jail. It's just not within the system of incarceration, policing, and prison to provide that. And I think once we just accept that fact, it's not coming from there. Safety, being seen as human beings, etc. None of that's going to come from policing and prisons, and standing really strong to the things and not giving way to the system, but standing really strong in our values and our principles and our political beliefs. That, I think like the biggest fight right now for me, as someone who's been doing a lot of historical research on like abolition and where it comes from, is getting real clear about abolishing the 13th and forcing the system to really reckon with figuring some shit out. Because what they did in the 1860s during Reconstruction is say, we don't want to figure this shit out, so we're going to slide this in here, this 13th Amendment, and put all of our issues into this lane. And so for me, it's like once we abolish the 13th, then this country will really have to start reckoning with what does it mean to not have a class of people who are incarcerated to do all the deeds that they need us to do. So that's why for me it comes down to just abolition at the end of the day. Because both professors and experts, etc., but also lived experience will tell us that there really is no other answer. We're living in that. I just cannot echo enough. We are living in the reality of living with both state-sanctioned violence and living communal interpersonal violence today. Murderers, rapists, police don't solve any of those issues. If not, they actually expand those issues and often lead to more violence, right? And so we're already living that reality. And I think, again, abolition just challenges us to really think differently about that. But you have to be very, 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 very solid in that. You cannot waver. You cannot say, oh, Minnesota, okay, we're going to demolish and reframe public safety, without police, and we see that doesn't happen. We just got to be. I want us to get real clear, and so I'm advocating right now for us to really, as a force of people who are interested in mass incarceration and getting rid of mass incarceration, is to unify around abolishing the 13th and really putting those kind of toes to the fire to say, okay, now you really got to figure out something different, because y'all had 200 years with this little clause and it's not working. Slide to you. Hey. It's 8:32.
Oh Lord, I forgot the question.
Oh yeah. So to all panelists, Chelsea was able to write down all the questions.
No, he didn't have to repeat. Seriously, I forgot what he asked. What he asked me?
Humanizing.
He asked you to humanize
your son and Nick. That's it.
That was specific.
Mm-hmm. Humanizing my son and Nick. Okay. He asked me what kind of person they were. So, Nicholas was a warrior. He was strong-minded. He was a strong individual. He stood and fought for not only his son, but he fought for many sons and daughters and people who have had family members murdered by the police. I learned a lot being out there with my husband. He taught me how to stand up and fight for justice. Mm-hmm. He taught me how to stand with others and be there for others when they're going through similar situations that I've been through and know about, be there to hold their hand, so to speak, to guide them through what they're going through. As far as my son is concerned, he's not the same person he used to be. My son he got arrested 5 days after he turned 18 years old. 5 days after. So he was still my baby, my only son. And he was quiet, very quiet. There was times when my son was in the house, I didn't even know he was in the house. That's how quiet he was. He was very intelligent. He wasn't really a street person. But since he's been incarcerated, like I said, I don't even know my son anymore. He's so angry. It's like there's a different person. That's not my son. Even the first time I went to go see him, standing in line to get in there to see your significant other, child or whatever, you know, when they brought him out, he didn't even look like my son at all. My son had long hair, always kept long hair. When he got arrested, they made him cut all his hair off, so my son is completely bald. He's so angry that I can't even have a decent conversation with my son. Whew. Sorry. It's hard losing a child to a system, and you know it wasn't their fault, that they was framed, and there's nothing that you can do about it, no matter how hard you try. They make it so hard for us to even try to get the money together to get a lawyer. And I've been trying to do that for the last 28 years that my son's been incarcerated. My kids don't even know what their brother looked like anymore. They haven't seen their brother since he was the age of 17. I can't even go see my son the way I want to. They switching him all around Virginia, from one prison to the other. So if I can get in touch with him today, tomorrow I might not know where he's at. And if I do find out where he's at, he's probably in the hole. And sometimes he be in the hole for months on end. So I can't talk to him, not knowing what's going on with him. You know, standing with my husband, I try to be strong for him, fighting for his son. And all the time, I'm fighting also for my son. And believe me, it's not an easy task. So for me to do it by myself without him is even harder. After my husband passed, I had got so sick that I thought I was just, I was on my way out. I just couldn't do it no more. But I had to gather myself and realize I can't just let it go just like that. I'm not going to let my husband down. I'm not going to let my son down. I'm not going to let his son down. Because his son was killed for playing with a toy gun. A toy gun. Didn't even look like a real gun.
Like at all, though.
At all. You could not mistake that gun for a real gun. And the cop got off. And then they had the nerve to send him back to the same projects where they killed the 13-year-old kid at, to patrol them same projects. Why would you torture his family like that? It's bad enough that the man didn't lose his job, but you're going to put him right back in the family's face and let them see he's still out there working? Able to kill a next child or a next person, or why would you put him out there like that? It's traumatizing for me to have my son locked up all these years, so I can only imagine what it feels like to have your son murdered by the police. I can only imagine. I mean, I've seen it firsthand, what it done to my husband. you know, I don't think I would have lasted that long. He was a very strong man to stand up there and fight like he did. Going to different places trying to get justice and being told lies. They're going to open the case. We went there 3 times. They opened the case. 3 times they closed the case. So can you imagine having your son killed by police? The police that killed your son is out there. He got a chance to do his whole bid on the force and retire with his full pension. And there's no justice done for my child that's laid in the grave because of what he did. I don't think I would have made it. I don't think I could have been that strong to last as long as my husband did. Because sometimes I feel like I'm not even strong enough to keep fighting for my own child. But I have to keep mustering up the strength to keep going.
I'm going to speak towards 2 questions and then Eugene can speak towards the rest. So with your question, Paul, about John Jay, I'm 34 and I started organizing when I was 19. So I was part of the Free CUNY movement. We used to protest John Jay a lot, like a lot. I just remember us just going there. And I'm a Brooklyn girl, Crown Heights. You had me on the A train. Anyway. Crazy. But the reason why I mention it is because I was recruited as an organizer in college at York in CUNY because I had a professor who saw potential in me. And the reason why I say that to you is, and like, I was raised, keep my head down, don't talk to anybody, don't do anything. Mother wanted me to be a nurse. Mother wanted me to be a dental assistant. I'm a licensed dental assistant, by the way. Because my mom could take your x-rays. Let me know. You know, wanted me to follow her plan. You know what I mean? Like I couldn't even look people in the eyes when I spoke to them. I look down. Like just very like repressed at home. And I was recruited in college. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because there is a strong student organizing legacy. And if you believe in some of these folks that you are working with, then you invest in them. Invest in them. Because nobody else is. John Jay is an institution that's not made to invest in the radical legacy of students. That's not what it's for, right? Because if that professor didn't speak to me and say, hey, you want to come to this action? Want to come around the Answer Coalition? I wouldn't be here. Because there's nothing in my story that told me to organize. Not a damn thing. In Creole, we call white people the white people. You elevate them, right? That was my upbringing. That was my language. That's what I spoke about. If I didn't have people who taught me history, who taught me what resistance was, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't know Donna. I wouldn't know Eugene. I wouldn't know Key. I wouldn't be sitting here in front of you, right? So I would say, if you want to teach kids to, well, not kids, teach adults or teach people or teach students how to organize, put in that work so they can do it. Not all of them are going to mess with it. That's not the word I was going to use. So I had to, not everyone's not going to move with it, right? For whatever reason. Some people might take a little bit. You might have to work with people past the semester. I was being recruited on for 2 semesters because I had to break my chains at home, right? So it took me 2 semesters to step into an Answer Coalition office, right? So I would say to you, if that's work that you want to do, like, tell them to come to TPF. There's events happening here every day. Be like, oh, you want to pass this class? You got to go to 3 TPF events and an Answer Coalition event. And you got to go to a demo. It's a curriculum, right? So that's it, you know? But I just want to say, there's hope. You know, it's just gonna take a little while. You might gotta take them to like a Dead Prez concert. I don't know. Do they still have concerts? Anyway, no shade to Dead Prez. I know this is recording. In terms of Nicholas Hayward, so I want to just elaborate on just a little bit more about Nick, because it takes a lot, I think, for all of us to just sometimes wake up in the morning and wash your face and brush your teeth and get ready for the day, because the system weighs down on you. And Nick got up for everybody, no matter where you were at. If you had Nick's number, you said, Nick, I need you to come out tomorrow. Okay, where? What's the address? I'll be there. He was always, yes, I'll go. Yes, I'll support. Yes, I'll speak. Always. The last year that Nick was alive, I saw him up to until he passed away when you called me. Nick's muscles were dying. So when Donna's saying he couldn't walk, his muscles had stopped working. And the reason why is because the same DAs, Nick had become such a legend figure in the police brutality movement because he was the only dad. He would be the only dad. You know, we had like Sean Bell's dad and, you know, Saeed Vassal's dad came later. But Nick was sometimes the only dad, and it would be grandmothers, aunts, moms that, you know, stood up for stolen family members. Nick became such a figure that elected saw his power. So they will go to Gowanus. Gowanus is a destitute neighborhood. One side is downtown Brooklyn, where all the courts are, right? And then is Gowanus. They would travel to Gowanus to get photo ops with Nicholas Hayward. They would sit down in his home and promise that they will open up this case and bring him justice every time during election year from 1994 until he died. Okay? They called Nick and told him that they closed his case. Nick stopped eating. We have to understand what we're talking about when we talk about trauma. Nick stopped eating. That's why he died. He went into a deep depression. He shut down because he believed that these folks were going to move him forward. He was like, okay, we're going to build power with the community, and there's power from up top. These are DAs. These are attorneys. These are city council people, right? They should be able to like move us forward. They should be able to do something for me. Nothing. And I say that to say that Nick was somebody that had the most revolutionary optimism. He believed 100% in people power. 100%. You know, and that's a big thing to carry, right, within a legacy when you don't feel any support for your case, but you're supporting everybody else's case. Traveling all over the country to stand with families. Just to have the door closed on your struggle. And even then, he still, when he was dying, was still trying to support. People were still calling him, and he was like, I can come. And Donna was like, you can't even walk. Where are you going? Like, that's who Nick Hayward Sr. was. And I think that's somebody that we should admire as organizers. Right? Like, he you know, he didn't make the history books, but he made our history book. We know him. We studied him. We understood him. Nick would go out in 0-degree weather. In 100 we marched 2 years. Like, I remember we marched all over downtown Brooklyn for 3 hours. 100 degrees. Nick was right there with us. There was no obstacle for him in terms of police brutality work. None. Like, we can talk about all the things, all the isms that make it hard for us to work together and, you know, divisions and sectarianism. Nick didn't have that. As long as you spoke about Nick Hayward Jr., he'll ride with you. Uplift his son. Don't let his son's name go down in vain. That's who he was. And we lost when he passed away, in the way that he passed away. There's a big hole in the police brutality movement because he's no longer with us. But the only thing Nick would want us to do is fight. Like, if he heard us talking like this, he'll be upset. Why are you crying? Let's go out into the street right now. That's who he was. He was always ready to go, ready to fight, ready to organize, ready to move things forward. And we have to have that same energy. Because even in his most painful days, he fought for us. Even though he didn't know you. You know, Bell Hooks said, I learned theory because I was hurting. Right? She was so hurt and so much pain that she was like, why is life like this? I got to figure it out. So she started reading Marx. Maybe there's something going on. That's how Nick was. I'm hurting because my son passed away. Everybody's my son. So I'm going to fight. So I just wanted to bring that energy and that history forward, because when we put that street on that neighborhood block where he grew up and where his son died in his honor, I mean, if he was still here, he would have passed out, you know? Because he didn't view himself the way that we view him, you know? He didn't view himself, he wouldn't call himself a revolutionary. He's just a community guy. And that's the type of energy that we need when we talk about fighting mass incarceration and police brutality. We need to humble ourselves to do this work. We need to have compassion to do this work. Right? The same level of compassion that Nicholas Hayward Sr. had. So I shade to him.
I think that's a good note to end on. I appreciate that. We touched most of them. Yeah. If you want to get involved, sign up for the Answer Coalition. We'll have more events. We'll keep building. Join the organization.
So thank you again, Donna, Kirby, Key, and Eugene. And I want to thank you all so much for your participation. On behalf of the Answer Coalition, I would like to express our appreciation that you joined tonight's Liberation Forum. Our goal is to take what we learned tonight and convert it into action. If you want to join our future actions and events, sign up to receive email updates through our website, answercoalition.org/signup. If you want to join the movement as a volunteer, please sign up as answercoalition.org/volunteer. You can also speak to one of our organizers here today. And also, we'd like to invite you back to the People's Forum next Saturday, September 17th at 1 p.m. For a launch party for the latest issue of Breaking the Chains, titled The Woman Worker, which is a beautiful, fantastic socialist feminist magazine. And it's a free event that will feature a community organizing workshop and a screen printing activity. So please come through. It'll be great. And finally, as a grassroots anti-war organization, we aren't backed by the ruling powers. We are run by dedicated volunteers and funded by donations from working class people like you and me. We can all play a part in the struggle for liberation, and everyone has something to give. If you want to financially support our work, we'll be passing the bucket around. And that concludes our program for tonight. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you, Jay. Appreciate you.
Ooh.
Key, was a pleasure.